about. I want to sort of talk about what wrestling is, right?
Yeah.
So I sort of feel like it's very hard to describe. Like Ezra was very nice this week and asked if there's any matches I should send him. And they got me thinking about that. And it'd be like if we were doing cricket and someone was like, just send me the 3 greatest cricket moments ever, right? So I actually Googled and watched.
There's one problem with that, which is that those are all like 9 days long.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, watch the best cricket test match of all time. It'll take you October.
But yeah, I mean, I watched just like a few like cricket highlights, and they were probably exciting, but I don't know how to watch cricket. I don't know how cricket works, so I couldn't get it. So I'm
trying to get the most whiffles in a pancake.
Yes,
I think.
What I'm trying to do here instead is sort of explain like why wrestling is appealing, how wrestling works, how you sort of watch wrestling, right?
I love it.
So I want to try to make you guys appreciate the craft and art form of wrestling. So let's pretend you didn't know anything about wrestling, okay? You had never heard of it at all. One day I came to you and was like, Alex, oh my God, you got to come to me to the show with me, right? It's this really crazy show. It's all the best sort of elements of live theater. Meets like this weird stunts and magic and illusion show. It has all these really elaborate effects and all these people doing these incredible athletic things. It's like loosely improv, and it has like kind of daily soap opera-esque storytelling elements where the story is constantly going on, right?
All right.
And at this show, there's this guy named Neo who's gonna fight this guy named Agent Smith. All right. And the thing about like Neo is he's like the one. He knows kung fu. He has this awesome finisher called the Woe, and he's with this like faction called Zion. All right. And then on the other side we have Agent Smith. He's an AI program. He hates humans. He has this finisher called the Blue Pill.
By Bing.
Yeah, manufactured by Bing. He's got this finisher called the Blue Pill, and he's with this like really fucked up faction called the Matrix. And these two guys are gonna fight, right? This sounds like a pretty great show, doesn't it? Doesn't this sound like something you would want to go see? That, my friend, is professional wrestling. All right. So
That's good professional wrestling?
Yes, good professional wrestling. So
there's so much bad.
Yes.
But we're giving it the best case possible,
yes,
Jamie. We're not starting out with here's the worst parts of it.
Kind of the thing about wrestling is I'm a lapsed wrestling fan. I was a huge fan of wrestling growing up. I haven't watched a wrestling show seriously in like 15 years, right? But my thing is I have so much respect for the art form, and I think it can be so much more. I think you can't hold wrestling against wrestling. It's kind of how I look at it, right? Like you can't hold like what stupid people and shitty companies have done to this very young art form and like really hold that against it. I do think that wrestling has a lot of potential to like make you feel emotions and things that like a lot of other kind of like live entertainments just can't do, right?
Jamie, I know we talked about this back in the day when we did a different podcast about wrestling. Are you current or are you also lapsed?
So I am current on AEW. I am only paying attention to a few storylines and what's happening in WWE. And then I know bits and pieces of what's happening on the indie scenes. It's basically like 3 continuities. Like you've got, your Marvel, your DC, and then your Image and your Independence.
Right. Yeah.
And I am very focused on, let's say, Marvel. I know kind of what's happening in DC. And then I know a little bit about the indies, but mostly I just look at the cool comic panels. Oh, this metaphor got away from me.
All right,
look at the cool finishing moves and call it a day.
Jamie, you would appreciate this then, that as somebody who likes wrestling, it's hard to like kind of have a conversation with people who don't watch it because they don't get it, right? It's a very hard thing to grok wrestling if you've never actually watched it, right? And you kind of have these preconceived notions about it.
One thing I like already, just because you had this nice photo collage for us, and there's people with like incredible human physiques that are like, it's impossible. How does a man look like that? And then you've also got this guy with a bad dye job, lost half his hair, and is like making the crazy eyes. And I like that there's room for both of them.
That's the Undertaker.
Yeah.
Can you please put some respect on the Undertaker?
Alex just found out who the Undertaker is.
I'm glad there's room for him and like whoever this guy's.
And I want to just give you for context. Mark Calloway, the Undertaker, is one of the most impressive physical wrestlers of all time. He is
okay.
for
He's
his
just
size,
not-
for being almost 7 feet tall. The amount of fit things
He's
he can
7
do.
feet. What?
Yes,
He can also walk the top rope.
yeah,
or could.
he can do it from the floor. He can jump over the top rope back out of the ring. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. He's also best friends with the devil.
Yes.
That's true.
He also believes Blue Lives Matter. That's
yes.
a fun fact about the Undertaker.
Hey, Mark Calloway does. The Undertaker doesn't. The Undertaker is A-cast all day.
Exactly.
Presumably, Undertaker believes no lives matter,
Yes.
right?
That's
You
true.
would hope.
That's true.
Or they all matter equally when he undertakes them. They're for him.
So,
Okay, great. So he may be a physically impressive specimen too, but terrible hair. That's all
yes,
I'm saying.
especially
I like
at
that
this
He also
time.
looks like Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he wrestled for a very
mean-
long time. He had a lot of different hairdos. First, I want to talk about one of my favorite things about wrestling. It's sort of the reason I think why I loved Magic so much as a kid, why I'm so into movies, stand up, and stuff like that. Is I love anything that has like its own language to it, right?
Sure.
Like and especially because Magic and wrestling have a lot of overlap. They use a lot of similar words like gimmick and stuff like that. But there's a whole huge glossary in wrestling, right? I mean, these are just a small fraction of it. But the kind of the important ones I want to work on and sort of like the basics of what wrestling is sort of 4 main concepts. The concept of a face and a heel. Most people know what those are, right? There's a good guy and a bad guy. Babyface is a good guy, heel's the bad guy. We have
Is there a baby heel or a man or an adult heel?
Yeah.
No.
Or a heel face?
heel face. Yeah, I mean that there is, it's wrestling became as it sort of like evolved into the 90s and the Attitude Era. The bad guys became the good guys, and the good guys became the bad guys because of culture. So that did kind of happen.
Stone Cold, I guess, would be basically a heel face.
Yeah,
He was a tweener, baby. Tweener.
yeah.
Tweener.
So there's Heat.
Well, The Rock was a heel face too, right?
I mean, The Rock went back and forth, right? He
Right.
started as a face, and everyone hated him. So
Rocky Maivia.
they turned him heel, and like that's where he kind of took off, and then like
And then everyone liked it. What a weird life where you're like, man, people hate me if I'm a good guy, but they like me if I'm bad.
You
That's
should
weird.
watch The Young Rock. This literally covers all of this.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So
I don't feel like he's earned that, but
there's this concept called heat, which is negative reactions, such as like booing from fans, right?
Yeah.
And heat is very, very important. It's a very important concept we're going to come back to. And the other one we're going to come back to.
And one thing that every wrestler knows is when you start wrestling, you never make any attachments in your life that you couldn't drop immediately when the heat is on.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God damn it.
Yeah. Don't have anything in your life you're not willing to pin 1, 2, 3, right? Don't have anything in your life you're not willing to put in an ankle lock and make tap out in the center of the ring. That's the old wrestling.
That's what everybody
That's
says.
the old Kurt angle.
Yeah, the Kurt angle.
No.
The other very important concept I want to talk about is the concept of over, right? So in wrestling, to get over is basically to achieve the desire you want from a crowd reaction, right? So like if an audience really, really likes a wrestler, they get over, right? You also pit someone over. If you're in a wrestling match and you're going to lose to someone, they're going over you, right? So you're going to pit them over, right? It's, wrestling's fun because it leads to a lot of fun conversation, like language tricks. Like you can say, you can get over without getting over. Like that means you can like come out and give such a good match that even if you lose, people will still like you, right?
Right.
And it's like that's very important is the idea of like getting over, right? Is like getting heat and getting over. That's the basic dynamic of wrestling. That's sort of what you want. That's what sort of allows.
Is there the opposite of heat? Is there like if you get a good reaction?
Yeah, that's
So
over.
That's being over. But there's like
bad heat,
good heat, and there's bad heat.
Yes.
Good heat is like, hey, we love to hate you. Bad heat is like, we just fucking hate you.
Fuck
we
off
wish you were not on our TV.
Yeah.
They call it go away heat or X-Pac heat.
Yeah.
Because X-Pac did not change his character for like 5 years, and everyone was like, we don't like you.
Yeah. So
fascinating.
So let's have this match.
Okay.
Let's have Neo versus Agent Smith. Okay. And first I want to say you might be angry at me for ripping off movies for wrestling, but I want to say that's been happening in wrestling for a very long time. I want to take an example here of like here's Sting after The Crow came out. You might notice his look is pretty similar.
I should clarify. This looks like not the Sting that I'm used to from the Police. This is a different Sting.
Hey, can I drop a fun fact on that?
Also, the same one, just more jacked.
So the wrestling Sting copywrote that name before the other Sting did. So Gordon Sumner actually has to pay wrestling Sting to use the name Sting.
Oh, it's like a URL thing. I get it.
Yeah, Steve Borden is
Jamie Carbone.
Yeah. I also want to point out, like, after Mortal Kombat came out, there was a really bad wrestler called Glacier who looks a lot like that. And also,
it's kind of like a homemade costume version of Sub-Zero.
Yeah, these are like Kirkland's signature brand Sub-Zero.
Yeah. Also, I would like to point out, after The Dark Knight came out, Sting stole from another movie. It's mostly Sting who steals from movies. Is kind of my point.
It's
kind of weird.
He was also still a good guy when he looked like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's okay. The best way I could say this Dark Knight version of Sting, it is like, I think the real Joker would be like, this guy is a little bit too much.
Yeah,
I think that's the reaction I think they would have.
Honestly, to me, it looks like Guy Fawkes eating spaghetti.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like to me.
Remember the pasta.
But I think the reason why Sting loves movies so much is he got bit by the bug early. Here's Sting when he tag teamed with RoboCop in the early 90s.
Oh shit! I think
he is okay.
This at some point, the RoboCop match.
I
think it was when we talked about RoboCop the movie, but this is a wild thing that happened.
Yeah, this is awesome because it's exactly like pro wrestling in the way that it's like, this is going to be a horrible idea and not work out well, but we're doing it anyway. Fuck it.
This Sting is like I think wearing like a spaghetti strap tank top is the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, this is Surfer Sting.
This is like. He looks like he's ready for bed. That's what he looks like to me.
Ready for Betty for sure.
This is like a guy like on like a California beach who also wore face paint for some reason.
Well, sometimes they have a face paint artist, maybe like on the walkway, maybe. So yeah, I get it.
So let's say we're gonna do a match like this, right? So how does a wrestling match actually work? How do like two wrestlers build a wrestling match? Well, how do you start a wrestling match? You start at the finish. So in all wrestling, you start with the end of the match, and then you work backwards to tell the story. And part of the reason why I use like the Matrix as an example of this is that the Matrix is a really good example of sort of like what wrestling does well. And what's like the Matrix has like 5 or 6 action scenes, but none of them are just there to be there, right? Every action scene in the Matrix tells a story. No characters enter and exit an action scene as the same people in the Matrix. And this is what like the best movies do. And this is what the best wrestling does. And this is the thing that's hard to understand if you don't really watch wrestling, is that wrestling, the matches aren't just a bunch of cool moments. They are a story being told by two performers in the ring. And if you don't know you're supposed to be looking for a story, if you don't know how to watch the story and how to read it, you're not going to get the same as you would if you did, right? So this is Dusty Rhodes. Let's pretend he's a booker here. Dusty Rhodes was a real famous booker. A lot of bookers in the wrestling used to be professional wrestling. Bookers do exactly what they sound like. They're in charge of creative. They decide who's going to fight and who's going to win, right? Let's say someone comes in and says, okay, Agent Smith, you're going over with the blue pill, right? And that's all you have, right? And like, depending on the wrestling territory, on the company, nowadays it's very common for like the wrestling to have like full writing teams who write out everything. Matches are very, very planned out. Back in the days, it wasn't quite like that. You'd usually start with the finish, and then wrestlers would kind of have their own style. People like Macho Man were very famous for like, hand writing out the entire match that they were going to do and making their opponent study it. A lot of wrestlers would just call it in the ring, right? Would just like kind of go out there. We know the ending. Let's just figure it out depending on crowd performance, right? So,
and by call it, do you mean they like whisper stuff?
Yeah, they just talk to each other
from body.
No, you can.
There's a lot of clips.
Yeah,
of people like yelling. You can hear them like yelling, "Hey, do this."
Yeah,
really. You don't usually hear them over the audience. Oh yeah, John Cena especially. Watch some John Cena matches. You'll be hearing me like clothesline and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's called calling it in the ring, right? That is just you are out there. You call spots to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, with the way a wrestling match works, is because if you know you're finished, you basically know the climax of your story, right? So you want to build the match in the way in which you have storytelling, you have your character or your gimmick that you are portraying, and you combine those together and you get the most important concept in wrestling, which is something called ring psychology. So ring psychology is the thing that separates good wrestlers from bad wrestlers. You can be the greatest athlete in the world, but if you can't grok ring psychology, you're never gonna make it, right? And vice versa. There are horrible wrestlers out there, but they really get ring psychology, so they're able to get over big and they become huge. Like people like Hulk Hogan's a great example of like Hulk Hogan's one of the worst workers and wrestlers to ever work in the business. He truly is bad. He knows like 4 moves. He is a selfish performer. He like refuses
Doesn't
to
put people
over.
over.
He hates to pit people over clean. But the way he knows how to work a crowd and how to tell a story in the ring is incredible, and that's a huge part of what got him over so much, right?
Okay, just for 1 second to slow down for me. So there's like you said moves. So there's like, these are the moves, or does every wrestler have like, here are my own things that I do?
Bit of both.
Like it's called getting your shit in.
So if I
Like,
yell
people will be like, "I wanna
clothesline,
get my
you know
shit
what
in."
clothesline means, because we all do clothesline.
Yeah, so there's like a baseline that everybody has. It's like, oh, moonsault, clothesline,
DDT,
you know, like a DDT, exactly.
Which is
and
where
then
you,
there's
where you
like
put
everybody
on a
has
bug
like,
repellent and the other person can't go near you because their name is Sting.
yeah,
That's
sure,
pretty good.
why not? You idiot.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes
I
sense.
like it
a lot.
Sometimes you start
But,
with
like-
the finish. I start with the beginning of a joke and hope there's an end when I get there.
Yeah.
And I got lucky
Yeah.
on that one.
Yeah,
Like,
you take the
every
J.J.
wrestler has-
Abrams approach to comedy of just like, yeah.
But everyone has like what you would call like a signature move, which is like a move that they'll do to like get the audience excited. But it doesn't usually end the match. And then they have what's their finisher,
Right.
which is like the big like, oh, if they hit this,
You
odds
suck
are
your
they're about to get
skeleton
the
out
Yeah,
through
and
their
we'll
mouth or
we'll
whatever.
talk about those sort of elements as they
Okay.
kind of work into a match.
Yeah,
So the
great.
idea of ring psychology is the way you tell a story. So like if you're like thinking of it like, you know, a story in wrestling can be anything. Like the most simple version is like, hey, I think I'm really good at this. Hey, I think I'm better at this. Let's fight and see what happens, right? But you
Right.
can still tell a full story by itself in the ring, right? And the way you tell stories in wrestling is like, let's say the finish is going to be like a submission, like a leg hold, right? Well, what you want to do is in the first act of the match, have the guy start working on that leg, right? And then you, as the guy who's getting hit in the leg, you sell that the leg is getting injured. So at the end, when you get pit in the leg submission, the tension is high. People are aware that that leg is injured, right? Or you can do like my favorite story type in wrestling is the old veteran versus the young upstart. And like this is a story you see a lot in wrestling, right? An old veteran comes in, a young peppy kid, and the veteran's like, all right, I'm just going to kick this guy's ass. But then the kid starts to surprise him. And he slowly earns the respect of the veteran. And by the end, like the veteran raises his hand. And you can tell that full story without any setup, without anything outside of the ring. Just have 2 characters walk in, and through their performances, through the way the veteran sells that he's being impressed by this young kid and getting angry, and like maybe he's going to take it too far, but the kid brings him back, right? Like you can tell a really dramatic story this way.
I'm enjoying this. I'm working on it. I'm going with you.
You're over.
Don't they
Getting
do
heat.
It's getting over. Here's my question. Don't they do this like 3 times a week?
Yeah.
With multiple matches per fight? How do you
So-
keep finding new interesting ways of telling those stories?
I mean, don't they make a million TV episodes every week? I mean, it's the same thing. Like,
Yeah, this is a lot more than that, though. This would be like if one TV show had like 10,000 episodes versus like,
and
200.
had fewer, and could only use the one set. They
Yeah,
could only
like-
afford one
Yeah,
set.
yeah, you mean like soap operas have been like that's literally what a soap opera is. That's why people call wrestling a soap opera, right? It's
Sure.
that same thing. These are long form story things, but it's like that's where storytelling and character comes in. Like that's where like really great wrestlers who are super innovative, people are still coming up with new things to this day. That's one of like the exciting
so we
things
start
about
in
wrestling.
the first act, and I'm like, oh, I'm selling that my leg is a little bit injured, and then in the second act, Stone Cold Steve Austin gives birth to twins, and one of them has amnesia, and then in the third act, I go in the leg submission.
Well, in the third end, you realize Stone Cold is just a figment of your imagination. It's like Fight Club ending.
Ooh, I like that.
Well, no, let's talk about
Have they
acts.
done a match where it ends with one person was never actually wrestling?
Maybe
There's
I'm
gotta
sure
be a
that's
Fight Club
somewhere. Yeah.
match.
Hey, the true Stone Cold was inside your head all along.
Yes.
There is
Oh, it's
an
the
indie
friends we
match
made
where
along the
two
way.
invisible men wrestle each other, and the referee sells all the action.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
And
That's
that's
awesome.
pretty good.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
I
So
like that.
Invisible Man versus Invisible Stan. And
Wait. The first guy's name is just Man, or is it Dan? I missed it.
Invisible Man,
yeah.
and then his rival Invisible Stan.
That's weird
See,
though.
that's
the-
perfect
yeah.
because then it does seem real. It seems like one person got an idea, then another person got
Yeah.
another idea.
I was like, yeah, if you're Invisible Man, you would be definitely mad at Invisible Stan. So I buy that part of it for
the
sure.
best part
That
of the
guy's a
whole
fighter.
match is that it takes place throughout like the arena they're in. At one point they go on top of a balcony. There's nobody there. It's just the ref reacting to things. One of the guys throws the other one off the balcony,
Oh,
and
no.
they gimmick the table at the bottom to split as if someone actually
That's
went
so
through.
Yeah.
good.
That's amazing.
It's great.
That's the best
very
wrestling
good.
match
Wrestling
of all
rules.
Yeah,
time.
wrestling
Jamie,
rules.
who won, Jamie? Who
I
won?
think Invisible Man did, but I can't remember
Yes.
the finish.
Well, presumably he's the original. He's the
Yes.
Grizzled veteran, and Invisible Stan is like a kid who's trying to make it big in
That's
the
the
invisible
upstart.
Yeah.
wrestling world.
So let's talk about
Whew.
heels. All right. So
Uh-huh.
every in wrestling match don't need a face and a heel, but we're doing a very conventional wrestling match here. So let's talk about what a heel does in a match, right? The heel is actually a pretty interesting character. Besides getting heat, which is very, very important, right? So that's what a heel is going to need to do during a match. You want to get the face over, and a heel is actually like the dance lead in a dance, right? A heel sets the pace, and they lead the match. That's what a heel's job is in the match. And the reason why that sort of works, we'll kind of get into in a second. So something that a misconception a lot of people have about wrestling is that wrestling, if you know how to follow it, especially in the West, like movies, most wrestling matches have 3-act structures. All right. And the first act doesn't begin when the bell starts. The act and the story begins as soon as you can see a wrestler. So the entrances is a huge part of the story. Act 1 in wrestling is usually called the shine or the promise. And what it is you use your entrances, you use the characters you build up on the way to the ring to set a promise for what you're going to get in the rest of the match, right? So if you're like a baby face, you come out, you're high-fiving people, you're super excited, you're setting a promise of this is who my character is, right? This is who I am. If I'm a nasty heel and I come out and I'm ripping signs out of children's hands and flipping people off, right? And I'm like, very angry and aggressive, that's the presentation I'm going to do throughout the entire match, right?
Right.
And so once the actual match begins, you have you start to tell the story. When you get into the second act, that's where you have a lot of fun things that you can really sort of do. The second act is usually when the heel takes over, right? In kind of classic conventional wrestling, the rule of thumb is that the heel can never out wrestle the face, right? The face is always a better wrestler. So that's why the heel has to cheat. That's why the heel has to do things that are underhanded, right? So
this is one of my questions, which is how come they get away with cheating so much? It feels like it's like in another sport, you'd be like, oh, that's a $10,000 fine or whatever if you get caught, a 5-second time penalty. They seem like the rules are more flexible.
Well, again,
here.
that's
The
what
rules are very inconsistent.
yeah, they are flexible. One, they do change a lot, but that's the importance of a ref, right? Wrestling has this concept of like the ref of the match is the only one who can make calls. So if a ref doesn't see something, it doesn't matter if everyone else saw it. It doesn't count.
There's no VAR.
Right.
They don't do any instant
Yeah,
replay
exactly.
on a wrestling match.
So
yet.
you use the ref.
Although I would propose, if I was in a writer's room, that's my next
You
idea.
would propose like a drone in there.
Oh,
Two ideas.
like
My
a
one
drone.
idea is
Wait,
there's a false, or there's one of the wrestlers was never there. It was a figment of their imagination. And the other
Okay.
idea is they're testing. AEW is testing VAR instant replay to get calls right, and then you have a new character, the VAR ref, who is making other wild decisions that really affect it. I think you could do good storylines with the VAR.
No, I think that's great. Well, you bring back RoboCop for the VAR
Yeah.
ref, obviously,
Yes.
It's RoboCop.
and then you have to wrestle with the really cool ref.
And
Okay,
he will
but when the
shoot
new
and kill
RoboCop
you.
was coming out, people were like, "Is RoboCop going to return to the ring?"
gonna-
That was an actual discussion
my God.
wrestling fans had.
Dang.
I love it.
But in wrestling, you have a lot of tools. So you have like a ref bump, right? Ref bumps are very, very common. That's when a heel might pull the ref into the way of like a clothesline, so the ref's knocked out, so you can cheat, right? You have all these different moves. You have one of my favorite things in wrestling that I think is a little overdone now is a false finish, right? Which is a role that is something that really builds tension. That's when the heel does a big move on the face, goes to pin him 1-2, he kicks out, right? That's super exciting. And you can use those to build like frustration in a heel, especially if a heel is having to cheat, but the face keeps kicking out. That's where selling comes in. That's where just being shocked and upset and like feeling like, oh, now I understand why the heel is cheating, right? That's ring psychology again, right? That is how you tell the story to justify the character. There's other things you can do in wrestling, like getting colors, pretty controversial. That's
I don't love this.
No,
I think I described
about this.
This looks like I think this is, if there's anything that people can maybe bounce off of on the wrestling part of it, it's like, I mean,
blood.
No, it's not real. It's real blood.
Some of this
it's
stuff's
not
pretty
real.
real.
Alex, all of this
It's
is
just
real.
that there's
So
there's zombies.
in wrestling, this is thing that's been in wrestling since the beginning. It's called getting color. I think it can be used well. I don't like it if every match has color, then it's like no matches have color. But getting color, there's two ways to do it. There's the easy way and there's the hard way.
Alex is starting to turn.
I don't love this.
So the hard way.
I was working really hard, Anthony. I want to say, just so you know, I was mostly with you, and this is you've lost me.
Well, hold on. This is only one part of it.
Yes.
Let's maybe this will be all right. What? Tell us about this.
So
Anthony?
the way getting color works is the hard way is exactly what it sounds like. It's the hard way of doing it, right? If you accidentally take a shot to the face and someone cuts your head open, you're gonna bleed, right? That's the hard way of getting color.
Okay, it's not intentional.
That's it. It's not intentional, or sometimes it is intentional, and that's just how the wrestler wants to get it. Because a lot of wrestlers are lunatics. The easy way is to do something called blading, which is when you take a small razor blade and you cut off a piece of it. You wrap it in duct tape. You either put it like in your gloves, or in your lip, or in your boot, or wherever. And then when the time comes for the spot, when you're going to bleed, you just take it, you give yourself a tiny little cut on your head, and you start to bleed. And the thing about blading is what you're actually seeing here is mostly sweat and a little bit of blood. It's on a magic trick, essentially, right? You are sweating so much in the ring that all it takes is a tiny little bit of blood that's going to spread in that sweat, and it's going to look like you're gushing blood. And it's a very dramatic storytelling beat, right?
Well, if you're gonna stick something in your glove and mix it with water, if it's a magic trick anyway, why not just have a blood capsule?
Because this way it keeps coming. Like, your adrenaline, it keeps pumping. Like there are videos of people like blading before a match, and they're doing like tiny little pinpricks that aren't really going to come through until their heart starts racing and they're really into the
okay.
thicket.
I don't love this, but also I don't know how it's like worse than like, say, like, boxing, if someone's like actually like hitting each other enough to actually cause bleeding.
This is safer than boxing.
Yeah, it's the worst thing ever.
Yeah, this is way safer than boxing and UFC. I mean, this to me is more along the lines of like what the type of magic that David Blaine does, right? Which is like technically physical body stuff.
Yeah, I know. You're like, well, man, you know what else? It's sort of like mosquitoes. You know how everyone loves mosquitoes? Yeah. This is sort of like when the coffee's cold, but someone told you it was fresh. This is like one of the, it's normal. It's just like traffic. It's just like it's like being stuck in traffic. You're just
I don't love this.
it to things that suck.
But no,
I don't love this, but I don't want to discourage, like, I don't want to taint everything. So
and I want to say, blading is a very controversial thing in wrestling.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is not something that is just widely accepted. It is something old timers talk about. Yeah. You still see it every once in a while, but it is.
You see it a lot with some people.
Yes, some people like to do it a lot more than others.
John Moxley loves it.
Yeah, but I felt like I had to sort of bring it up. I knew going into this was going to be the most controversial thing in my presentation. So I'm glad we had this conversation.
There is a famous soccer blading incident, and I don't remember exactly details. I want to say it was two South American teams. It was like a World Cup run-up match, I want to say, but there was a very famous incident with where one somebody threw a firework onto the field, and the goalkeeper of the team that was losing used a small piece of razor blade or glass that he had found on the field and cut his forehead when no one was looking, and then acted like the firework had hit him. And so the team, they were way behind. The whole team got up and left in protest because they were worried about their safety. And then later you could see on replays he was nowhere near it, and he clearly just was doing that.
Dang.
So this is a thing that has existed in other sports that I do like, but man, not a popular choice. I think that guy is disgraced.
But also, I mean, I guess I don't know if this is how is it that different from like Tom Cruise like injuring himself on like tons of like stunts.
I also don't like
right?
that. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
So,
well,
dude, it's so normal. It's just like when you have a rock in your shoe and you have a long way to walk.
okay.
but once we get into Act 3, we get into the finish, right? So that's how a wrestling match ends, and that is, your wrestlers are gonna have a finisher, right? Usually like a big power move. This isn't the case so much anymore, but in classic wrestling, heels would use submissions and faces would always use quick power moves, right? And the reason why that is, I was trying to explain this to my wife, and I came up with a good metaphor I like. The reason why this rule of thumb exists is the same reason why James Bond villains use elaborate traps and Bond uses a Walter PPK. Right? One is there to create tension. One is how is a hero going to get out of this situation. The other is used as a release, right? It is something James Bond can just grab real fast and use.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he can use it on anybody. He can use it on somebody who's 7 feet tall. He can use it on someone who's 3 feet tall, right? He can it works anywhere. And wrestling moves need to kind of work the same way. You want the face's big power move to be able to something that he's coming back from a comeback. The heel just keeps cheating, and all of a sudden he gets a second wind. He gets a hero spot. He does his quick move, and bam, can take out the win. Or if a heel, you want them to, when they get the face in that submission, you see the face really selling how much it hurts, how much they need to get out, and the crowd gets behind the face, wanting them to break the hold, grab the ropes, whatever.
It's a strong metaphor. I like it.
I like this a lot.
So that's the way a wrestling match works. And then when we get to the end, there's sort of two ways a wrestling match can end. There's what's called a clean finish or gaga. A clean finish is exactly what it sounds like. That is, I beat you in the ring, 1, 2, 3. Or I put you in the submission hold in the middle of the ring. You tap out. All right? Now, that can be great, but the problem with it is it has a finality to it. You wrap up storylines with clean finishes. But in wrestling, you want to do long form storytelling, right? You want to bring out, stretch out these stories and get angles. So sometimes you can't just end with the good guy beating the bad guy, right? So you do some gaga. You do things to have, a bad guy's friend come in and hit you with the chair and knocks you out. So this way, when the bad guy pins you, he technically beat you, but did he really beat you? You know what I mean?
Right.
Did he really get that over? But what's really funny is you don't see it or hear about it too much today, but especially back in the day, the idea of pinning someone over clean, people could be so shitty about that. Especially we already talked about Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was so notorious, especially as somebody who took advantage of people like Andre the Giant willing to pit him over clean, which is what fucking made him, right? The fact that he beat Andre clean is legitimately that is what built him. And then when he got to that point in his career, he would refuse to do it. There's a famous in the business oh, that doesn't work for me, brother, is a cliche for a reason, because Hogan was famous for saying that, and he would always work creative control into his contract because he was so powerful, and he would just refuse to pit people over clean. There always had to be some kind of gaga if he was going to lose, right? So this way he could say, I didn't really lose, even though it doesn't really matter. Again, it's wrestling.
That's a fascinating mental thing. Although it sounds like if it was the thing that got him famous, he understands, look, I would like to stay famous.
Here's the thing. I don't think that's what got him famous. I think it is what got him famous was that he had the loudest, most braggadocious character. He sold it well in the ring. He was able to carry himself with an energy that at the time wasn't seen that often.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the voice that people make do when they're doing fake wrestling voice.
Yeah,
but also What it was he was a big New York guy at the time. At the territories, New York was the biggest one because they were buying out everybody else's cable spots. So the reason he got to be so big was that he was the face of the company when they were doing their first big national pull. Anybody else could have been in that spot and would be just as
Right
big.
place, right
Hogan
time.
just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like there's a difference between like if you look at like the careers of Hogan and like Steve Austin, right? Like Steve Austin is legitimately lightning in a bottle. Like Hulk Hogan was there and helped make Vince McMahon a millionaire. Steve Austin made Vince McMahon a billionaire, right? Like Vince would have been a millionaire with or without Hogan. I truly believe that. But like Steve Austin as a character and as a performer, right, built the WWF as we know it.
Like Hulk Hogan is a real life heel, right? Like,
yes, he's a real piece of shit.
He sucks.
Yeah.
And then Stone Cold is like in real life famous for doing like the most Make-A-Wishes of any
No, that's
human.
John Cena.
No, that's John Cena.
You're thinking of John
Damn
Cena.
it, never mind.
Hogan also, or sorry, Stone Cold was not a great person.
Yeah.
Okay.
But has become a better person.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Like he very much like he's a big like he speaks out like for like trans rights, LGBTQ stuff. Like he posts about it on his Instagram and stuff. He has, but in the 90s he was maybe not a good guy.
Yeah, he was a professional wrestler in the fucking 90s. I mean, what do you like? Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah, it does not sound like it was a breeding ground.
Yeah,
for
I mean, like
morality.
in wrestling, it's like that's kind of like one of the problems with wrestling. Like, it bums me out to know about the Undertaker. Max Calloway is like a shitty person.
I wish he had shut
There's
up after he
only
retired.
like the thing that sucks about liking wrestling is that there's literally if you have a benchmark of like only wanting to support like people who have always had good views and always good people, there's literally two people. There's Mick Foley and Kevin Nash. Those are the only two wrestlers who, even in the 90s, had progressive views and were like out and out good people. Right?
Yeah. Mick Foley still rules.
Yeah, Mick Foley still fucking owns. But you know, if we do all this right, what do we get? We get a pop the crowd. We get this. I wanted to look at some of these photos of just like the emotions that wrestling can bring out. This is like a really famous photo right here. This guy is literally shook. He had his world destroyed. This is a very famous photo from WrestleMania when Undertaker kind of had this narrative they built over 20-something years of he never lost at WrestleMania, and he finally did a few years ago. And this was this guy's reaction when the Undertaker finally lost.
Guys, yeah, it's just like mouth open, eyes just like sort of staring.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of just like there's a lot of real feelings.
Video of this.
This is the face I made when the last episode of season 1 of Severance was over. When they were just like, hey, guess what? There's no ending to this season with no resolution to any stories. That's the face I made. I was that shook and angry.
Oh,
It's a good show. I get it.
I liked it until that point.
Yeah, what's funny about this is that if you look at the video of this, people keep moving. He sits completely still like this for like 2 minutes. It is amazing. There's obviously the Miz girl, this little girl who was so upset that a favorite wrestler lost.
Yeah, it looks like this
Weird
girl is
choice,
kind of like gonna light something on fire with her eyes.
Yeah.
To be clear,
Yeah,
this
that's what I
is
could
strong
say.
Matilda vibes. She is definitely moving something with her mind right there.
We have this guy
Yeah.
crying for the return of CM Punk, some kids freaking out, right? This is what is so
Guy's not doing very good
amazing about
masks.
wrestling is even that it is so silly and it requires a bit more suspension of disbelief than a lot of other forms of theater. If you're willing to give in, I love going to the theater. I go and I see, musicals multiple times a year. I love live theater. I have felt a lot of things doing that, but there are feelings of being in like a wrestling show with like 16,000 people. The only common denominator is that you're all wrestling fans, and like a big moment happens and the crowd pops and everyone is on their feet. The energy is in the room. It is
It's
so
electric,
incredible. Yeah, like there are moments in wrestling, like I, doing research, just watching stuff. I was like rewatching just like Mick Foley winning the title the first time, and there's like a legendary pop from Stone Cold coming out of nowhere and like saving the day that is so loud and is so dramatic. It like literally made me tear up watching it this week. Just the emotion 20 years later, like I can still feel the energy and the emotion and the power of this like months of story building to this incredible moment, right? And that is sort of what makes wrestling so unique and special, right?